Hello, Peter Taylor. I've got the joy of interviewing Peter Taylor today. Now, Peter, I've known for a very long time, actually, over 10 years. And he is an environmental scientist and has worked for the United Nations at some point, and has got 2 Oxford degrees. He's an amazing man, has worked for all sorts of people over the years. And I heard about Peter when he wrote a book called Chill. What year was that, Peter?
It was published in 2009.
2000. That's when I actually came to live here in Glastonbury, and you live locally. And I read the book, and it was about global cooling, which was really something in 2009. And of course, your colleagues didn't really take that book very well, did they? They kind of, you got ousted from the whole thing with climate, from establishments like the UN. So tell us about that. What happened?
Yeah, well, my colleagues, in a sense, were the environmental movement itself. Since the mid-70s, I'd been working on issues of ocean pollution, atmospheric pollution, um, trying to stop certain bad things happening, a lot to do with toxic industries, nuclear power, and so forth. And I'd never looked at the climate science as such. So all the institutes worldwide were saying, carbon dioxide is the main cause of what we're seeing in terms of global warming. And at that time, before I published Chill, I'd been involved in working with government, the Department of Trade and Industry and Countryside Agency, on how to integrate renewable energy into the environment. There are the things I care about, such as biodiversity, community, rural communities, especially upland mountain communities. When I looked at what was being advocated in the year 2000 by the Royal Commission, and that was only with like 50% reduction of emissions, it wasn't net zero. I looked at it, I thought this is going to have incredible impact on the countryside. Solar panels, wind turbines, it was a godsend to the nuclear industry. Biofuels, hydro schemes. We couldn't supply all our renewable energy from Britain, so we were bound to go and exploit other areas, which I can talk about. And so I was still thinking positively that the best thing to do is find a way of integrating it. So I designed a tool by which communities could decide for themselves. So it was like a computer landscape, very similar to the one that they would be in. We did a Western, a Midlands, and an Eastern landscape. And you could choose how you would answer the integration of renewable energy so that people were using their energy locally, fundamentally, sustainably. And that was a 3-year project. It was funded by the government. It was my design. I had the help of some incredible computer engineers who could visualize and work with I'd seen with my own children how they were in fantasy landscapes. And I thought, wow, you can fly into them. And if you've seen these computer games, couldn't we do the same for educating communities about their own landscape and what they could do and so on? So it was quite a sophisticated project, and we were blessed by some very, very good minds on the job. And that took me to about 2003, and I was actually sitting on a government committee of community renewables. How do you empower communities? Where can they go for information? Can we give them any money? And so on. I think we had about £1 million on the table. So I was well on board, and given my record on ocean pollution, particularly working with Greenpeace, I was their chief advocate at the UN for many years on ocean pollution issues. And eventually the UN realizing that they got it wrong, and that's an important thing for what we can talk about, because all the institutions of science at that time thought you could dilute stuff, put it in the ocean, and forget about it. Oh, not entirely. You would monitor just in case you got it wrong. And if anything went wrong, you could stop whatever you were doing? Well, yes and no, because you could also end up with stuff in the atmosphere or the oceans which you can't do anything about, such as CFCs, and we nearly lost the ozone layer. So science makes a lot of errors, and those errors are not publicized. They rather cover them up, and CFCs in the atmosphere is a bit of an exception because uh, they regard that as one of their success stories. They quickly stopped the production of CFCs once they realized it was destroying the ozone layer. What's generally not known is that science itself nearly missed the whole thing. They just missed the first bit of data from the Antarctic that the ozone hole was happening. And it was only pressure from a few scientists below who managed to get it up on the agenda. But in the years before that, they were advertising chlorofluorocarbon as something you can clean your wash. You could do your washing up in it. It's totally non-toxic. And
Mm.
of course, they didn't think far enough. So I'd been educated in the limitations of computer models, one of which had been you can dump nuclear waste to the bottom of the ocean and we will track it, and we know where it's going, and monitoring and all of that. Well, I examined all of that very carefully and realized that this was in a way, an entree into the ocean for some very toxic stuff they wanted to just drop at the bottom. Um, and so we would analyze that, and I had a lot of support within government, as well as within Greenpeace. And we were able to penetrate the whole structure of the modeling and criticize it, bring it before the UN. And then the UN eventually saying, look, we realize that you're right. Will you come in and help us? So at one point, I was consultant to the International Maritime Organization, coming in to rewrite their legislation such that these practices couldn't happen. And in parallel with that, I set up a team which was engaged in looking at technology and what's the clean production strategy. So you don't produce toxic material that you have to get rid of or store or discharge or whatever. It's called clean production strategies. There's a book on it. I have a chapter in it. Again, some incredible brains came in on that, one of whom, Tim Jackson, is now professor of sustainability at Surrey University. So there's been a big shift in thinking, in scientific thinking. And actually, there was quite a lot of opposition from the scientists. They say, oh, this is political, it's not scientific. No, no, it's scientific. It's about the limits of your scientific knowledge and how you deal with your errors. So that was my background and schooling,
Mm.
until I realized that trying to integrate renewable energy, trying to run an industrial country such as Britain, which is very small, um, on renewable energy would just destroy so much of what I cared about. And that landscapes, mountains, I'm a mountaineer, but also community and biodiversity. There are lots of implications. I mean, for example, we can't grow proper biofuels here to run our 10% EU mandated biofuel in your petrol or diesel tank. We went to Colombia and colluded with the clearing of 400,000 hectares, 800,000 acres, nearly a million acres of land, clearing it of people and putting in palm oil plantations to get biodiesel. Same thing happening in Brazil with ethanol, hydropower. Again, what happens with hydropower is that people with the resource, Southeast Asia, Iceland, and so on, they desecrate their own wilderness by damming the rivers, generating carbon-free electricity. Then they attract huge industries like aluminium, smelting, and so on. So all of that's going on, and it's a big melee. And so I highlighted all of that in my research. I spent 3 years going deeply into climate change and the models, and I was interested in how long have we got.
Mm.
I was quite shocked to find how uncertain the science was. there were key elements which you can spot when you know how computers are programmed. And you go, well, why did you choose that parameter and not this one? And
So do you think it was, excuse me, I mean, do you think it was a lot of reliance on modeling, and this modeling was flawed because it's actually it's not really a stable model, is
yeah,
it? To
the
do,
problem
yeah.
with the models is that they have a certain lifetime when they're generating uh, some kind of conclusion. Then you have the policy people, governments,
Yeah.
industry, and they come in and they say, no, we need certainty. You'll talk about maybe this, maybe that. So the modelers then say, well, that's really difficult to give you certainty. We'll give you our best shot. And that's usually an average. You know, they've got very different projections. And then you have what I called in the old days of the ocean pollution issues, a prior commitment. You have a prior commitment to that model.
Mm.
And then when new data comes in, which actually would invalidate the model, they criticize the data. They don't go to look at their model.
Yeah. Now, was the IPCC then? When did the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, were they involved in any of this at
At the
this
very
point?
beginning, yes, the
Yeah,
first meeting was probably around 95, 96,
yeah.
when the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change was set up. And at the time, I had moved on from ocean issues to forestry, wildlife, countryside issues, and so on, which were more of a passion than trying to stop the bad guys doing stupid things.
Mm,
And what I didn't realize is one of my colleagues in the US, who'd worked with me very closely on the ocean issues, we used to do a tandem act at the UN because he represented a tiny Pacific island atoll, but he had one vote, and the US had one vote. So he was not their favorite person. And the US was behind a lot of dumping operations and so on. So I kind of lost touch a little bit with him. And when the publishers asked, um, can we have a professor who will endorse your analysis? So I said, well, yeah, contact Jackson Davis in California. And what I didn't realize is he'd gone on to work on the climate issue, and he'd helped to set up the Framework Convention, and he'd co-wrote, he was a leading author of something called the Kyoto Protocol.
oh gosh, right.
So he was right there on, you know, the whole narrative, as
Yeah.
indeed I had been. So I took my analysis to him, and I just said, look, Jackson, this is where I've come to. He said, oh, you can't possibly be right, Peter. You know, it's like the whole world. I said, no, not the whole world. There are a number of scientists who disagree. They're just
Mm,
being marginalized and not being listened to. The same story we had with the ocean issues. So a little sub story to this is that when I published Chill, and Jackson endorsed the book and said, these questions have got to be answered. Now, the main issue was not actually global cooling, although that was a potential that was about to happen. It's taking a while. But there is the potential for a natural cycle which peaks around now and declines around now. So we're at the peak and it's going to decline. And on the back of that, everyone says I was prophesying global cooling. But when when I was talking about that, um, I wasn't really prophesying global cooling. It was like, yeah, that's potentially going to happen unless we get an ocean cycle called El Nino, a super El Nino peaks at the end of a period when there's very little global warming. And you can draw a line like that, which is a completely false thing to do because this is a natural bump. So that's happened, but two bumps all in a row is almost unprecedented. So we've got very unpredictable, unnatural, but very warm conditions at the moment. So everyone's saying, oh, well, Peter Taylor was wrong. But what people don't realize is that when you're measuring temperature at the surface or in the atmosphere, you're actually measuring heat leaving the planet.
mm,
Heat is stored, and the only place it's stored is in the ocean. So the ocean stores the heat, and the only source of that heat is the sun, and it's the sunlight called shortwave radiation that can penetrate down to 100, 200 meters. It gives all its energy to the surface layer of the ocean. The ocean's 4,000 meters deep, mostly, and it just stores this energy in the top 200 meters, but it shuffles it around. It shuffles the heat around in currents and releases it in cycles. So most of my book is about those cycles and the release of heat from the oceans, and which says this is what's happening now, but they cannot put that into the models, and models have their limitations.
Mm.
And that was my specialty. So I understood why they couldn't put it in, but on top of that, they just ignored all the cycles research.
Yeah.
And
Could I ask you quickly? Have you must know Valentina Zarkova, because she has a similar. She's written some peer reviewed papers, and she's on the whole global cooling thing.
yeah,
What do you think about her work? Do you agree with it, or what do you feel?
we have been in communication, and uh, generally there is a smaller group of solar scientists like Zarkova who think we're about to enter a Maunder minimum, or
Mm,
they talk about a grand solar minimum, which at the moment isn't happening. There is a decline, but it's not dropping very
mm,
severely. And most of the NASA scientists and a good few others don't expect that. And actually, when the little sub story was after the publication of my book, ITN News have a documentary section, and they phoned up, and it was a science correspondent, I think it was Rob Wilson, and they said, "Oh, we'd like to do a feature on your work." I said, "Oh, wow, yeah, great, one man against the world kind of thing." And but it's television, so we had the first meeting, and they said, "Can you make it televisual?" So I said, "Yeah, fly me to Greenland." I always wanted to go to Greenland, but David Attenborough had just suddenly come off the fence,
oh dear.
and he's pointing to the glaciers falling into the sea. I'll stand where he stood, right? But instead of pointing to the glaciers, I'll point to the ground, and which is just uncovering because of the thaw Viking graves. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings were farming on Greenland. Then the cycle changed because it was peaking around 1,000 years ago. Cycle changes, goes down. They had to leave. So it's like at the same time, white stork, who are just now colonizing Kent after an absence since the Little Ice Age, they were nesting on Edinburgh Cathedral in the year 1100 or 1200 or whatever. So as an ecologist, I'm looking at, wow, these cycles, they're very real. So we were going to go and produce this program, half an hour documentary. It would have done wonders for the sale of my book. And I got a call after about 3 meetings saying, "Sorry, Peter, you come in, we'll explain. We can't go ahead." We got pressure from above. We call them the Goreites. Al Gore had set up a media empire,
Um,
and they had power and influence. So, and their science correspondent was so disgusted. He said, "I'm resigning." And this is a science journalist. And he said, "Peter, what do you need for your work?" I said, "Well, I have no budget, but I really need to go to the United States and talk to my colleague, Jackson Davis. He's got resources. Here's your airfare," he said, out of his own pocket. So I hightailed it to my friend who was living in Colorado. And on the hill outside Boulder, the city he lived in, is the US main laboratory for computer simulation of the globe. It's called the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And there was also a university specialist there, Colorado University, who was a specialist in how the oceans release heat. So I wanted to talk to him. And we had 5 hours, incredible talk, great conversation, well respected. And then we went up the hill to the National Centre Government Operation. It was a bit like something out of James Bond. And in comes the chief modeler, puts his feet up on the table, cowboy boots, dressed in denim from head to foot, 6'6" tall, big hat. Jerry Meal, one of the top international modelers, feeds into the IPCC. What can I do for you guys? So I lay out my data, which was also in Chill. Said, look, this data does not support your model. What the data actually shows is just at the time when the world is warming, the clouds are thinning and there's more energy coming into the surface, warming the oceans then release it, much more energy, about 3 times as much as your carbon dioxide model. So it doesn't figure, you've got to answer this. What's going on? And at the time, NASA were going, well, the clouds could be a feedback. Carbon dioxide thins the clouds. Right? Well, there's not many people are going to go, yeah, right. So this was still the question land. And then I feel this pressure, the ITN story, but more than that, up until then, I was like a hero of the environmental movement. My whole family had been involved. We'd climbed chimney stacks, mostly my brothers. We'd walked into desert nuclear testing sites, boarded dump ships. It was like yeah, we were well regarded.
We all bought into it. I mean, I did transition town training once, and
Yeah, yeah,
I took the whole family to see
yeah,
Inconvenient Truth,
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
to realize you just come to this
Yeah,
moment where you
but
think,
honestly,
this
that
is
respect
incredible.
evaporated overnight.
Yeah,
And that was the biggest shock. It's like, well, hang on a minute. I was vilified. Some people were very rude. Um, and I was portrayed as all kinds of things that I'm not, like right wing. I'm not right wing. Um, and in league with the oil industry, I once turned
mm,
down a contract with the oil industry. And and this was a shock. I suddenly realized, wow, these people are
mm,
not the kind of people I grew up with in the environmental movement. Even the
yeah,
Greenpeace people, it's all changed. They're professional, yes, but they've all got another agenda. And it's like, I mean, my good friend David Taylor, who lives not far away, he was a Green during the time when we were creating the Ecology Party. I helped to create that.
yeah.
Then we were advising it not to become a party and not to become a Green political thing because
That's where it all went wrong, wasn't
I'm
it?
not
The
surprised
Green,
because
yeah,
it's
when it changed from the Ecology
yeah,
to the Green Party is when
the dead hand
I did.
of political parties. I'm
Yeah,
a fundamental Democrat. I
yeah,
believe in empowering parliamentary committees, the whole deal. And there are some good
mm,
examples of that globally. We are not one. We could have been. What we've seen is the gradual erosion of proper democracy. I mean, for me, the key moment was when Andrew Bridgen, a Conservative MP, stood up in Parliament just to say something doesn't add up about all these vaccines,
mm,
and the COVID story. Just a question. And there were maybe a dozen MPs present, 6 on either side. One of them walks over to the Labour benches, I think the Tories were in power, and whispers in their ear, and they all walk out. They
mm,
don't even listen to what he has to say, just the minister who has to respond. I
mm.
thought, wow, I had no idea it was so bad. And since then, I've got to know Andrew, and wow, I mean, he was just completely shunted aside overall. The Tory party disowned him, and so what I've learned is that there's a media compliance with, in the words of Greta Thunberg, follow the science. But whose science are they following? They're
Yeah,
following the institutes.
mm,
And the top level in the institutes, I'm quite convinced there's a little group of politically minded scientists. And one can understand it, but that they've concluded that in order to save the environment, you have to control people's behavior. It makes sense, of course. People en masse are doing some very, very stupid things. But what they don't realize is that to control people means you're moving into, it's called left wing, but it's not originally left. It's more Stalinist.
Mm.
It's anti-democratic. It's
Mm.
we know what we're doing and we're not going to tell you because you wouldn't
Absolutely. I
understand.
mean, this whole thing about left and right is really clouding it all at the moment, because there is no such thing right now.
Yeah,
That it's
we need
disappeared.
we
This
need a new
left
political
wing. Yeah,
language to
we
describe.
do. We do. Yeah.
Some people call it techno-fascism. Now,
Yeah.
in the early stages of the nuclear movement, anti-nuclear movement in Germany and France, which
Mm.
I was involved in, you could call them fascists. They would
Mm.
field troops protecting their site. Protest was heavily, heavily dealt with.
Mm.
In France, one protester was killed. Um, we were much more gentlemanly in the UK, but there was a movement. There was an anti-nuclear movement. Now, the nuclear industry is dusting off its worst plans to use plutonium as a fuel. The nuclear weapons issue, the closeness that we are to nuclear war by accident, which is more likely the way it will happen, and there's no anti-nuclear movement.
Mm.
So
Because you were really big in that, weren't you? You were a big anti-nuclear. You were an activist, actually,
I
weren't
was
you?
both an activist and a scientist.
Mm.
I consulted with the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War on the effects of nuclear weapons. You cannot protect the public from a nuclear attack. This is absolute nonsense. Uh,
Mm.
First of all, it takes only about 200 explosions, and each side at the moment's got about 3,000 weapons. And you create a dust cloud that shrouds the planet, and no crops will grow for 3 years.
Mm.
So that's the extinction of a large proportion of humanity. So it's like it's not even an issue, today.
Yeah.
So I'm in a very strange position. I spent my whole life thinking you can reform things, you can improve democracy, you can talk to science. I am a scientist. I have total respect for the scientific method. I've got a forensic mind for spotting when it's not being applied properly. And actually, within the lower rungs of the scientific institutions, I get loads of invitations to write papers, to go to conferences. You have to pay. And I did a paper in 2019. I signed up to one conference. My colleague Jackson Davis, what I didn't mention is that when we had our experience with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, he came out, he said, Peter, they were worried. I said, darn right they were worried. They get billions to support their models.
Mm.
And to give them their due, that particular group did alter their models a little bit.
Yeah.
And they did actually run a potential Maunder minimum and concluded that there would be cooling. Our own Met Office did the same study, but with different parameters, and concluded that even if you had a Maunder minimum, it wouldn't alter the global warming trajectory. So that's science for you. But anyway, Jackson said, what can I do to help? Now, he's what I would call a proper scientist. I'm more of a policy person, forensic mind. He can number crunch, which I can't do. And so he said, what can I do? I said, analyze the ice core data. Let's show them that these cycles exist. We know they exist, and you can see them in the ice core data, but nobody's actually proven that scientifically. They say, oh, it's too noisy. The data's too noisy. And what they really mean is nobody's going to pay us to study natural cycles, which is unfortunately true. So nobody paid us either, but Jackson spent 7 years doing that. And we then produced several joint papers, uh, properly peer-reviewed, properly published. They don't get cited. So if you've got some awkward data, they'll ignore it for as long as they can. But the younger scientists, are going, "That's a damn good paper," and that's due to my friend. He's the good scientific paper writer. He said, "Will you come and talk to us?" And I thought, well, as soon as I do the abstract, they'll disinvite me, right? No. And then they said, "Would you chair some sessions and be our keynote speaker?" And I thought, maybe they're all very young and they want a grey beard. But no, there were full-on professors present, including, I think, when the IPCC realized they were up against some proper opposition, they sent their top modeler, a very nice guy called Venkachamalam Ramaswamy. And and he's up there on the podium with his models and everything, and I'm able to say, Professor Ramaswamy, my work and Jackson Davis' work and yours are not compatible. Can you explain why? There's no cycles in your models. I says, yes, we don't do cycles very well. Now, if I'd been in a if I'd been in a more cantankerous mood, it was a very friendly meeting. I'd have said, well, why do you not tell the public that? Right? So he said, come and have lunch. And he's director of the General Fluid Dynamics Research Laboratory in Princeton. He said, "Come, have a talk with us." Um, and I thought, right, that's what happened before. The UN's open on a scientific level. I go in there, and most importantly, you've got to find a way for them to save face. Fundamentally, I think I could do that. And it's like, um, if you trap them in a corner, they'll fight you. So it's like, all right, I'll do that. But then COVID intervened, which is something else that we can talk about, and so that never happened. And
Yeah.
and with COVID, well, I did get involved because right at the beginning, I knew from the old days and old skills that I developed that it was a bioweapons laboratory source, and that it was genetic manipulation and the whole thing. You could get hold of the genetic codes right immediately, but they disappeared. Peking or Beijing covered up the whole trail. But for a few months, it was available, and I got most of what I needed, including access to a collaboration between the former head of MI6 and a top virology team, Norwegians actually. And so I thought, oh, okay. I then asked all the leaders of political parties and all the editors of the newspapers I copied in. I asked, could you raise with the Prime Minister what advice he received from the Secret Service? They will know what's going on. It's bioweapons territory. Didn't get any replies. Now, of course, we know very well
Mm.
that the World Health Organization was compromised. The scientific journal Nature was compromised. The head of the Wellcome Foundation, which is the main pharmaceutical funding body in the world, compromised. The pharmaceutical regulators, Fauci and his crew in the States, were compromised. And the virology professors on board, there were about 6 of them. We know this because the US Congress has a much better system of tracking and nailing these people. And they subpoenaed all the emails from a little group that met in the Center for Disease Control. And there you have it, all in the emails, where the virology professors are saying, yeah, we know it came from a lab, but we can't say that. It
Mm.
would compromise science itself. It would affect our relationships with China. So we'll say it's highly improbable that it came from a lab. No. And the editor of Nature, top journal, is there to publish that. Well, when I saw the paper, which was obviously before all of this was exposed by US Congress, when I saw their paper, I thought, this is rubbish. How did that ever get published? It's not evidence. So that's the kind of way I work. It's forensic. The lessons from COVID are exactly what's happening in climate science. It's exactly
Yes.
what was happening previously in ocean pollution issues. That by the time you get up to the top institutions, you're dealing with levels of complicity and collusion. Um,
Mm.
and indeed, the whole COVID thing, you're dealing with a conspiracy on the part of these people
Yes.
to cover everything up and actually mislead the public and mislead parliaments. And then the whole establishment closes ranks, and the media are complicit, the BBC especially. Um, one of my housemates said the other day, "Oh, Glastonbury, there's so many new age people, and they don't trust the media. They're all on the internet, and it's all misinformation." And I said, "You know why? Is that they know now they were lied to by the BBC. The BBC said it was just a normal vaccine. It wasn't genetic manipulation. It couldn't have come from a lab. They now know all of that was lies.
Mm.
The BBC just parroted what they were fed. And that's the nature of the BBC and the lack of investigative journalism. Now,
Mm.
I can look back, I can look back 40, 50 years and go, wow, we used to have investigative journalism. We used to have an effective parliament, parliamentary select committees. And now we've got a Labour government which is authoritarian. It's just sacked a whole bunch of good MPs because they were troublesome enough to vote against taking money from the disabled to fund, what? Net
Mm.
zero or weapons or nukes or whatever. It's like, whew, they can find 22 billion for a new nuclear program, but they can't find 4 billion to properly fund
Absolutely.
the
I'd
disabled
like to get
people.
onto your book because
Mhm.
I think it's important
Have you got a
we
copy to flash?
I do. This is Peter's book, Climate, COVID, and Conspiracy, and I'm wading my way through it, and I'm one of those really bad people that look at the end before the beginning. But I have looked. I've looked because a lot of it is scientific, but you describe it in a way that I can understand, which is
Well,
brilliant.
the structure of the book, I was asked by an activist group in Stroud, where I'd given a talk, um, if I could write a follow-up to Chill, which is 15 years old. So that's a big undertaking. I don't think I'm really capable of that now. But I have been writing lots of articles, and they're not in standard scientific journals. They're in Caduceus, which is an environmental health magazine, uh, and New View, which is from the Steiner stable. So it's quite
Mm,
esoteric.
it
But
is.
also, for some reason, they had reviewed Chill and they wanted to follow up. So again, I did an update for them as an article. And the editors are very good. They said, no, 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 no. Lay people will not understand what you're saying, right? So can you find another way to say it? So the book consists mostly of articles over the last 10 years, plus an introduction and a link between the COVID articles, which I did, and the climate, saying what lessons can we learn from the COVID saga, which are relevant. And you've even got Klaus Schwab of World Economic Forum uh, fame as saying we should learn from COVID, right? And he's talking about lockdown, controlling behavior, influencing, nudging people in the right way, producing fear because
Mm,
people who are in fear are more easily controlled, uh, suppressing the media, all that kind of stuff. And there is a school of thought that thinks we will only solve the climate crisis by world government, if the kind of control, and they're not secretive about it, that you would experience in China, total surveillance, total control of behavior, no spirituality, which for me is a kind of key element in all of this, that we're dealing
mm,
with a cadre of bureaucrats who seem to have no heart.
mm.
There's no wisdom when you
You're
look at the
right.
current situation where you've got bioweapons labs building the next dangerous virus, which will be bird flu. At the moment, bird flu only infects directly from mostly chickens and in sort of high intensity chicken production. So they're always subject to viruses, so they're always subject to vaccines. So it's a big industry. And the bioweapons people are always looking over the shoulder of these vaccine people, saying, have you got any dangerous viruses that we can work on? So that's what happened at Wuhan. They had a dangerous bat virus. It killed
Mm.
half the miners that had been exposed to it. But it didn't transfer from miner to miner. It was from bat to miner. It's the same with bird flu, and doesn't translate from human to human. So what they do in the labs is say, well, how can we make it transfer from human to human? That's what happened at Wuhan. And it was there in the science literature. How do we do that? Here's how we do it. And they insert codes for
Mm.
the transmission through human
I
lungs.
remember, excuse me for interrupting, but I remember Richard Daysack. Do you remember Richard Daysack, the zoologist
Mm,
who was involved with Fauci
yeah.
and the lab in North Carolina in the university? And he was bragging. I've still got the clip, bragging on YouTube about how they manipulate things in the lab, and they splice humanized mouse cells with bat viruses. And I just thought, oh my god, this was before COVID. And I just thought, my goodness, this is. And when afterwards, I realised that's exactly what it appears they did. I mean, I know there's some people that don't believe in viruses, but you have got people being paid to do this stuff. So, do the viruses exist? They certainly did in the bats, didn't they? The corona. There were
Well,
bats took
this
away a lot
is
of
like
coronavirus. Mm.
you get memes that go through what's called the truth movement, and one of them is first viruses don't exist, which is complete rubbish, and
Yeah.
then there's oh yeah they do exist, but they don't cause disease. Well, if you unless you've met somebody with a virus that's actually giving them a really hard time, you can probably conclude that. Terrain theory, and the thing is, there is a bit of truth here. Take meningitis, for example, viral meningitis. It's a real killer. But the bug is there all the time.
Mm.
What happens is that immunity rises and falls according to stress, according to diet, according to age. And so we live in a population that's getting older and older. The diet leaves a lot to be desired. And so immunity is very low. So the first projections of what would happen when this bat virus was unleashed or escaped were huge. It'll go through the population like a wildfire, because we have a low immunity group, about 13 million people, whose immunity is compromised. So terrain theory has certainly got something in it.
Mm.
But coming back to this, you don't get a huge lab working on perfecting the transmissibility of one virus so that it will infect a human uh, if they don't exist. So that's what happened in Wuhan.
Because they did work on that for about 30 years, didn't they? They were 30 years doing this. So it
More,
must
more
have
like
been
more
some.
like 10 or 15 in the recent
Oh, was it?
times.
Oh, right. Okay.
There had been a number of outbreaks of bat virus disease,
Mm.
and it was quite lethal, but it wasn't transmissible.
Mm.
One was in the Middle East, and there was actually a SARS outbreak in China, which is when they first noticed this bat virus is lethal if miners, cave people, breathe it in. So what happens is that within the Wuhan lab, and this would be any lab really, the bioweapons people keep an eye on what's going on, and they are military, of course, and they go, "Oh, we're interested in that," and so they actually took the codes, and I think they worked on it themselves. I don't think
Mm.
the famous Batwoman of Wuhan, Xi Zhengli, I don't. She said it didn't come from my lab. I was
Mm.
like, well, hang on a minute. What's she saying there? Well, just down the road is the bioweapons lab, and they've given the codes. Those codes also went to North Carolina,
Mm.
and so when the Chinese say it could just as easily have come from the Americans, right? Now the thing
Mm.
is, the Secret Service know all this. I mean, either they're incompetent and don't know it, or they
Didn't
really
they
know
throw
and
out?
they're not allowed
Sorry,
to say.
didn't they throw out? Didn't they throw them out of North Carolina because they found out they were doing gain of function?
Well, now
I
you've got President Trump coming in on it,
yeah.
and appointing Robert Kennedy Jr. So they're on the
Mm,
case. I don't know how far they've got, but I think Fauci, who's the head honcho in the
mm,
disease control, but it's also the bioweapons section,
mm,
he's got immunity of prosecution, as indeed all the pharmaceutical companies have. So the rationale behind this, and Peter Daszak's job, is to find those viruses that are dangerous and can be manipulated,
mm,
because the enemy might do the same. Now, the enemy's never specified, but it's kind of Osama bin Laden territory. And after 9/11, the bioweapons community received billions to protect us against biowarfare. So what they have to do is how do you protect against biowarfare? First of all, you have to work out what the enemy is going to do, and then you have to get a vaccine ready. So that's what was happening in Wuhan and CDC in North Carolina. And they had a vaccine more or less ready. That's why it happened so quickly. And one of the most egregious things from my perspective, having worked on radiation, when there was a big blind spot in the 50s and 60s about low level radiation, every single scientist in the institute said, it's not a problem. There's a threshold, and low level radiation can't cause any harm. One scientist stood against this, a female epidemiologist, Birmingham University. Her connection with doctors was telling her that more children were coming showing leukemia than there should be. She investigated, and there was a correlation between those children whose mothers had been x-rayed and the development of leukemia in the fetus, in the children. She was vilified. She was opposed. It took 10 or 15 years to change the establishment view. They even knighted the British, the main protagonist, against her, Sir Edward Pochin. She received no honours at all. Of course, nobody now x-rays pregnant women.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
your dentist will leave the room just for a
Mm,
little x-ray here. So it's like you've even got people within the kind of anti-environmental movement saying we should get more nuclear power, and all this stuff about radiation, it's overhyped, and there's a threshold, a little bit of radiation is good for you, kind of stuff. And they ignore all of her work.
mm. Yeah.
And this is a gender issue. You know, they were blind to pregnant women.
Mm.
And what happened in COVID? Within a very short time, they were saying, yeah, we want to inoculate pregnant women.
It's
I'm
awful.
going, but hang on a minute. You're not allowed to test a vaccine with pregnant women. So it means it's not tested. And then the first data coming through from Japan showed that the spike protein, which one of the chief people to do with mRNA technology had said, what are we doing? We thought the spike protein would stay in the arm. And I'm going, I'm a biologist. What on earth made you think that? Then the data comes from Japan saying it goes all over the body, concentrates in the uterus. And then that would be enough to go, all right, we're not going to inoculate pregnant women. But then a year later, a Japanese team studying cancer rates in those people who'd been vaccinated and those who hadn't. And that they're not much accelerated, maybe about 2% overall. But in the uterine cancers, more like 10%. And so, because my database is a bit of a shambles and I was writing about it, I thought, I must go back to that paper, get the details. I remembered the authors I had. So I find it's on a Japanese journal. It's been retracted. It's been withdrawn. So normally you have to have a process to do that where the people who wrote the paper agree with the criticisms and to have
Mm,
it retracted. Those people did not agree and they were opposed to the retraction, but it happened anyway. So that's another little way in which the establishment protects itself.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
they will try and get your paper retracted by putting pressure on the editorial board. And I've witnessed that. So all of these things, we're talking about a high level of complicity, collusion, corruption, conspiracy.
Mm,
And if you use those words, then they dismiss you. And they don't even, the Greens don't even register my past history. You know, I'm not some lunatic going on about conspiracy. It's like, come on, let's get real here. But they don't want to. They don't want
yeah.
to because
Yeah.
they have an ideological commitment, and it's basically a China type society where you can control everything, and it's very well in their eyes. It's very green, but even then,
I mean, it's the opposite though, isn't it? Because, when you look at what the Greens are supporting is a non-biological technocratic society. And it's the direct polar opposite of what they profess to be. They're all about nature and conservation and all this sort of thing, but actually what they're supporting is entirely different. In as much as they're covering our land with solar farms and wind farms, and the farmlands disappearing, and they won't have that conversation, and it drives me insane, and it must drive you insane too.
oh,
They just are blind. They're blind to any of this technocratic stuff. And when you listen to someone like Noah Yuval Harari, who's Klaus Schwab's advisor, and he says, our aim is to have nothing biological on this planet. Get rid of everything, and you just think there's an element of something very evil there, sort of real
I
sort of,
I wouldn't use the word evil myself. I've
yeah.
I've called it the dim, DIMMM, dim wits, the
Yeah,
dangerously imbalanced modern male mind.
thank you.
And what you have is it's mostly a male thing, especially the science. Lots of women involved, but they've already agreed to be like a man, right? They'll do the methods just the same. There's no
Yeah,
difference. In fact, often they're better. Um, but what's missing, the imbalance, is the feminine power, the feminine polarity, and that's not so much about gender as such. It's about wisdom. And if you go back to the ancients, they had a goddess, Sophia, uh, wisdom, and we have it in our language, Sophia, philosophy, the love of wisdom. And that wisdom was always embodied by the feminine for good reason. The wisdom is not in the mind, right? And there are all these mental men that they have no wisdom, they have no heart. The whole corporate endeavor, which is 300 or 400 years old, which has raped the planet, there's no dispute about that. Um, this is the modern male mind gone completely AWOL. It's absent from its own heart, and that's acknowledged. I mean, you can't talk about heart around a boardroom table. You can't talk about heart in the city. You can't talk about love should reign supreme in all of this. We live in a Christian hypocrisy where it's okay to stockpile nuclear weapons and call yourself the Archbishop of Canterbury or whatever. It's like, no, this is not a society that has any real connection to its heart, and therefore it has no connection to wisdom. So what we have to do is somehow re-immerse the male into its own feminine. And that is a big undertaking because we're talking about a feminine approach to consciousness, which we've hardly ever seen. We've been in 3 or 4 thousand years of patriarchal, control orientated war, defense, enemies. So I've been for my next book, I've been going back to where this all began and trying to find the thread that runs through that has subjugated the feminine mind, which here I'm talking about um, intuition, love, um, and compassion, and not seeing the world full of enemies.
Mm.
I mean, Jesus said all of this. I'm not a Christian as such. I'm closer to Buddhism or yoga or whatever. But we don't live in a Christian country.
Don't you think though that it's an imbalance? It's more of imbalance because I feel that we do need strong men. I feel that the male energy in our world that has okay, we've got the awful corporate stuff going on, the patriarchy and the corporations, but a normal sort of setting, I feel that men have actually lost their masculinity, their the good side of masculinity, which is the protection of the female and the helping of the and the guardianship and the warrior. That there's no male warriors anymore. Where are they? Where were they during? I mean, I know I went on quite a few of the lockdown marches, but certainly in this movement, there's been far more women coming forward than men, and that has to be wrong. It's almost like I feel they've lost the good side of masculinity. Masculinity is important, and if all the men become over feminized, then surely that's not right either.
Yeah, I don't think the men are becoming over feminized. I think the problem is that when men wake up to the depth of the error and they feel, oh my God, we are responsible for this. We are toxic masculinity walking around.
See, I don't go along. I'm
Well,
sorry, I disagree with
I've seen enough
you.
of it to know it
Okay, yeah,
exists.
okay,
I, in my younger days, I was trained in the military, and I used to hang out with some pretty special forces people, and it's like you pick up on the mentality, you pick up on the attitudes to women and so on. I hope it's changed since then, but overall, um, you get very decent men. I've got a very positive view of our own military. My father was in the military, so I've seen it at close quarters,
yeah.
and you've got very decent men who have a warrior spirit. They have a strong protective nature. Unfortunately, they're being used
Hmm.
by a regime that puts them usually in a foreign place, protecting so-called national interests.
Oh no, I agree with all that. I
So
understand completely.
what's missing is that when the men wake up, they feel guilty. They
Yeah,
suppress their masculine because they don't know how to act. I can feel that many times.
yeah.
How to act around women without offending, and
Well, exactly. Yeah.
so there's this uncertainty about masculinity,
Mm.
and
I think men are very confused in a lot of ways because you've had the feminist movement that in some ways women needed to the whole 50s woman had to break free from the kitchen and all that stuff and had to go out to work and financially had to and men don't know where their place is because sometimes the women are more powerful, so they're not quite, yeah, they're very
for
confused.
me, the feminist,
I'm worried about time as well, but
yeah,
we can carry on for a couple of minutes, and then
yeah,
I think we
for
must
me,
get on
the
to,
feminist movement made a huge, understandable error in pursuing power.
yeah,
Equality is power, and that directly you are entering the male world and you're proving that women can do just as well in that world, whether it's a
yeah.
banker, a top chief executive, or a fighter pilot, an engineer, a chemist, a bat virus specialist. It's like they're, they're just playing the male game, and
Okay.
like I say, they can be very good at it. I'm a huge fan of
Yeah.
female football, female rugby, female athletics. Wow, these women are real warriors. It takes
Yeah.
discipline and skill and all of that. So great admiration. But what's not happening is that the deeper, darker feminine, what used to be called witchy, that is not okay. That is not celebrated. The kind of woman who knows where you are, knows what you're thinking, can actually, in a way, travel a little bit in the astral realms. What? We don't want that kind of woman. And this is exactly what happened in, England, 1600. You
They
get,
all got
you
burnt.
get, yeah, you get the King of England, who's regarded as the Solomon of his time, i.e., wisdom, no way, attending witch trials in Scotland before he became King of England, and writing a book on demonology, outlining why you cannot trust women. They're much
Yeah.
closer to the devil. You know, they
No,
are, they're
I
connected.
can't go along with that. No.
They're connected to this unseen world, and they can manipulate it like the witches. And
Well, I think women do hold a lot of power. They are in a way, they're a creatrix. There's a lot of power within a woman, and used the right way, it can, like men, it can be used the wrong way. I think all of our power, masculine power, female power, can all be used the wrong way. And I think that yeah, I mean, this
I
is
might be idealizing. I might be idealizing women, but I feel that they're closer. They're
it's
closer.
very lovely though.
They're closer to their heart,
Yeah, they are. That's
and
true.
that's why. That's
They
why.
have to, as you
That's
say, they
why the
have to.
ancients said wisdom is feminine.
Yeah,
It's because real wisdom is a heart thing,
yeah,
and that's what we're missing. And the women have to bring that back, but they have to
yeah.
bring it back with some power.
The wisdom
We're
and the
not we're
heart.
not
That's
going
what we
along
need.
with this anymore,
Mm.
and we're going to stand up for the heart. We're going to stand up
Yeah,
against all of this. So
yeah.
I think women should be the leading edge of the change.
I
Uh,
think they are. I
if
think they
we
are. I think
yeah,
somebody like the Dalai Lama said it's the Western woman that will save the world.
all
Who
right,
knows?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I,
hope,
I,
well,
who knows?
it certainly needs
It needs
it
it.
needs saving.
Now, let's just give this a bit more of a plug.
Yeah,
Where can we get your book? Is it
you
in
can get it
bookshops?
from Amazon. Bookshops don't necessarily stock
They
it
don't. No,
because
this is the
it's
trouble. Amazon
regarded as
hasn't.
too controversial, and the
Yeah,
Green Mafia might show up and trash the shop. That was the
yeah.
excuse given in Glastonbury for why the only independent bookshop wouldn't stock it.
I'm going to have a word with that man. I know
Good
who
luck.
he is.
I
I know
tried.
who he is.
Yeah, yeah,
What's good is that we can, a whole load of us can go in there and say, look, we're trying to buy this book and it's not in your shop. What's going on? There's enough people that support your work to do that. We've got to get a whole thing going because he could make some money. And when he realizes he's losing out on
yeah,
money,
yeah.
maybe he'll change his mind. Anyway, so what's your final thing that you'd like to say about maybe the whole world, about what's going on? Because I know you're a very esoteric man. So what would you say as a final thing?
Well, the esoteric means inner world, and uh, recently, after a talk I'd given about the dangers that we all face, someone said, "Don't you get depressed? Because the prospects are not good." And I said, "No, no, I can't get depressed." It said, "For me, there are two worlds. There's the outer world, which in yoga is regarded as a bit of an illusion. You wouldn't want to stand in front of a bus, but it's still an illusion, right? And then the inner world, and that's the reality. And the inner world is something that you have to get to know, you have to explore. For a man, that inner world contains a woman inside you, who usually you've suppressed. And my inner woman says, "You've been ignoring me all day, and why don't you let me make the decision sometime?" And it's like that's the level of rebalancing that has to happen. We have to strengthen our hearts, and that's heart is where the courage is. And
Yeah.
you take Andrew Bridgen standing up in Parliament and ruining his whole career. He didn't have to do that. And people will come up to me and say, "Why are you ruining your career over this?" That's courage.
Hmm.
So it's like we've got to get courageous, and we've got to get the heart back, and we've got to do the inner work so that when it really gets tough, And here it hasn't got tough yet. But if you're in Syria or Palestine or South Sudan or a lot of other places on the planet, Armageddon is already with you. So it's like
Yeah.
we have got to wake up. Our whole country is planning for nuclear war. The whole country, our leaders, so-called. Um, they haven't learnt the lessons from COVID. Those bioweapons labs are still producing. They're still working. They're still dusting off the plans for a plutonium economy, hoping people like me fade away, you know. So it's like, mm, it's crucial. It's crucial that we find our heart and our courage very quickly now, and then from there we reform the system. So I don't know of any political party that's dealing with this.
I'm not sure political parties are the answer, but
Yeah,
I think sadly we're going to have to wrap up
yeah.
now.
So well, thank you
I,
for the
I
opportunity.
think those very wise words at the end. Absolutely, we need courage. We need. You know, you. Those are very wise words. You're a very wise
And
man.
it takes work. It
Yeah,
takes inner
yeah.
work. It's
Work.
not easy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It can be scary. You're facing your own shadow. One has to actually realize there's only one human being on this planet, and we can really screw up now. And that's
Mm,
where science and this dangerously imbalanced modern male mind has led us.
hmm.
So this is like wake up or die. and
God
uh,
bless.
and
You.
that's what we have to do, and it's hard work. It's hard work to maintain that inner world, and in different times you would be burnt alive for doing that, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Right. Well, Peter, it's been absolutely marvelous speaking to you. And I don't know where the time's gone. It's
no,
just gone.
I was just looking,
And it's
yeah,
because it's so
okay.
engaging.
Well, thank
Bless
you
you.
very much for this
It's been
opportunity to
wonderful.
talk so widely, Sandy, and for being such a good host. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.